Good afternoon. I'm Sergeant Sherry. Today I'll be giving a brief on stewards of the Army profession. This brief is unclassified. The purpose of this brief is to go over attributes of stewards of the profession, how they can impact the culture of the Army and improve the Army as a whole, and ways that they can improve not only themselves as stewards, but those around them. So this is the agenda for my brief. I'll start with an introduction. I'll then cover attributes of stewards of the profession. I'll then move into how these professionals are important to the Army culture and the Army as a whole. Next, I'll cover opportunities that we as professionals and as NCOs have to improve ourselves and the soldiers around us. I'll then conclude and have time for questions. During my brief, I'd like to cover these three questions. I'll start with what is stewardship and tie that into stewardship of the Army profession itself. That then ties into how stewards can uphold the Army culture. Next, we'll talk about how this culture can build trust not only within the Army, but outwardly with the American people as a whole. So what is a steward? A steward is a caretaker of resources or buildings, land, or an organization. So in our case, we're talking about the Army, stewards of the Army profession. One of the main attributes of stewards of the Army profession is upholding the Army ethic and values. The best ways that we as soldiers can do that is through these three C's: character, competence, and commitment. Starting with character, that is the integrity and the courage to do what is right regardless of the risk. So the Army ethic provides us with a moral guideline to know what we should do in a given situation, but it takes character to uphold these values and this ethic in the face of risk. The next aspect is competence. That's constantly striving to improve ourselves as soldiers. We're seeking excellence not only in ourselves, but also with our subordinates. We're constantly pushing them to get better. This can include traditional and non-traditional schools, but it's also constantly trying to improve ourselves not only in the professional world, but in our personal lives. And it extends throughout our entire Army careers. The last aspect here is commitment. That ties into the accountability that we have towards each other. So holding ourselves to the standards that the Army has set for us of discipline and the Army ethic and values. Another attribute I'd like to talk about is protecting and preserving resources. The American people have entrusted us as soldiers with countless resources, including land, buildings, equipment, and weapons. It is our responsibility to maintain all of those resources, not only to foster trust with the American people, but also to ensure readiness of ourselves and of our unit as a whole. The last attribute that I'd like to talk about is enhancing esprit de corps. I kind of touched on it already with competence and constantly striving for excellence, but that's the part that ties into well with the winning spirit that underpins esprit de corps for the Army. The winning spirit that we have as soldiers gives us a common sense of purpose with other soldiers around us. This creates a sense of belonging to a band of brothers and sisters. As stewards, we can always seek to improve and enhance that esprit de corps and make sure every action we take is for the good of the team. So we've talked about building trust within the soldiers and within the Army itself, but we also need to forge a bond with the American people. So in the same way, we can demonstrate our culture outwardly and show our discipline to the American people, which will foster that trust. That trust ensures that we can accomplish our missions in terms of accessions, so that our recruiters can accomplish their missions, making sure that we're not only putting a high number of soldiers in boots, but a high quality of soldiers in boots. Making sure we're getting people that can uphold the Army ethic and values and continue to be stewards of the Army into the future. That's how we continue to improve the Army culture, not only today, but into the future. So as stewards of the profession, but especially as non-commissioned officer, as non-commissioned officers, we have many opportunities to improve. One of the best ways we can do that is by following trends. And that ties directly into the second bullet point here with technology. Most of our trends today have to do with technology. So we can use technology to connect with each other, with fellow soldiers, and that's how we continue to hold each other accountable and improve the culture internally. We can hold each other to the standards that we have and that the Army has laid out for us. The technology also gives us a great opportunity to connect with the American people. Again, we understand the importance of that in building trust with the American people and fostering a strong military in the future. So we can use that technology to display our actions, our discipline, and our standards to all of the American people. Technology also ties into the third bullet point here about feedback. We need feedback to improve ourselves, but nowadays with the technology, we have more feedback than we ever have before. So we have more opportunities to continue to improve. The thing with stewardship, though, is it's not just about improving ourselves, but it's about improving all of those around us, especially NCOs and leaders. We need to ensure that we're promoting stewardship with those that are our subordinates. So the Army has said that stewardship, it's the responsibility of leaders to promote that from the top down. So in order to do that, we can display our stewardship and make sure that we're leading by example, but we can also hold the soldiers beneath us to a higher standard, ensure that we're fostering that Army culture and that discipline that is necessary for the Army. So the purpose of this brief was to cover the attributes of stewards of the profession, what they are and what they do, and how they can impact the Army culture. I then talked about how this culture can benefit the Army. I also talked about how stewards of the Army and non-commissioned officers, especially as leaders, can improve not only their own stewardship, but the stewardship of the soldiers around them, particularly their subordinates. This ties into the top-down approach that the Army has for stewardship of the profession. Are there any questions? At this point, if there weren't any questions, I would have some prepared questions for the audience as checks on learning. So one of the questions I might ask is, what is an attribute of a steward of the profession? I could also ask, what are some ways that NCOs can improve themselves or the soldiers around them, improving the stewardship of the profession? I can also ask, what are some ways that stewardship of the profession benefit the Army? Once all the questions are done, this concludes my brief.